Have you ever stopped to think about what schools are really teaching our kids? I mean, sure, there's the math, the reading, the history, but what if there's something else going on? A kind of hidden curriculum? Well, today we're going to dive into that provocative idea, and we'll be using the groundbreaking work of researcher Jean Anyon to guide us.
So, the basis for this whole discussion is Jean Anyon's super influential book, Marx and Education. We're going to break down the core arguments from her research because it offers a really different and honestly pretty challenging perspective on what our schools are actually for.
All right, let's start with a simple question. What's the real point of fifth grade? Now, Anyon's work suggests that maybe, just maybe, the most important lessons have nothing to do with fractions or state capitals. Maybe the biggest lesson is in how students are taught to learn, to work, and to think, or not think.
And this is where it gets fascinating. Anyon observed classrooms in schools that were just a few miles apart, but they were worlds away. Look at this. In the working class school, work was all about following a procedure, rote behavior, not a lot of decision-making. But in the executive elite school, totally different game. The goal was to develop analytical powers, to reason your way through a problem. You weren't just following steps, you were creating something new.
And this quote, wow, it just makes it so real. A teacher in one of those working-class schools literally told a student, "No, you don't. You don't even know what I'm making yet. Do it this way or it's wrong." Think about that. The lesson isn't about creativity or understanding. The lesson is about compliance, period.
So you have to ask, right? Why? Why on earth are these schools so incredibly different? Well, according to this analysis, the answer lies in something called the theory of social reproduction.
At the very heart of this is an idea called the correspondence principle. It's pretty straightforward, actually. It suggests that the skills you pick up in school, whether that's following orders without question or analyzing complex problems, are designed to mirror or correspond to the kind of job you're probably going to have later in life. So from this perspective, school is basically job training. Now, to really get this, we have to understand how this theory defines social class. It's not just about how much money you have. It's about your fundamental relationship to the economy. Are you an owner, someone who profits from capital? Or are you a worker, someone who needs to be hired to make a living? That distinction is everything.
And you can see how this theory maps out a whole cycle. Step 1. It starts with your family's social class. Step 2. That pretty much decides what kind of school you go to. Step 3. In that school you learn the skills, either rote or analytical, that match a certain type of job. And finally, Step 4. That education sets you on a path toward a job that looks a whole lot like your school experience. The system, according to this argument, just reproduces itself, generation after generation.
But this whole idea is way bigger than just a few classrooms. To really see the full picture, Anyon zoomed out. She looked at an entire school district, Newark, New Jersey, to see how huge economic and political forces were shaping education. And what she found in Newark was sobering. She found schools that were just completely overwhelmed. They were drowning in the consequences of deep, concentrated poverty and the economic collapse of the neighborhoods all around them. The problems inside the school were really just symptoms of a crisis happening outside the school.
Her analysis points to 4 huge drivers of this decline. First off, as the city's population got poorer, public investment in schools just tanked. Second, you had big corporate decisions and federal policies that were actively pulling jobs and money out of the city and into the suburbs. Third, cities like Newark were politically isolated, leading to decades of underfunding. And finally, local political corruption meant that jobs in the school system weren't always going to the most qualified people.
And this quote just nails the whole argument. Anyon wrote that trying to fix an inner-city school without fixing the neighborhood it's in is like trying to clean the air on one side of a screen door. It's such a perfect metaphor, right? You can try all you want, but you're working against forces you just can't beat. School reform, in other words, can't happen in a bubble.
Okay, so this all brings us right up to the present day. If we take this analysis seriously, what does it say about all the big education reforms we've seen? Can schools actually fix society's biggest problems all by themselves?
Think about huge federal policies like No Child Left Behind or Race to the Top. Whether we realize it or not, they have been driven by one single, really powerful assumption about how the world works.
And here's the assumption. More and better education will get a person a good job. And that, in turn, will reduce poverty and inequality. It sounds perfectly logical, right? It's the American dream in policy form.
But here's the tough question that Anyon's work forces us to ask. What if that link is broken? What if, in today's economy, getting a better education doesn't automatically lead to a better income for most people?
And when you look at the economic data, you see something pretty shocking. Since the 1970s, American workers have become way more educated and way more productive. I mean, the productivity line goes straight up. But for most of those workers, their actual wages, adjusted for inflation, have basically flatlined. There's this huge, growing gap between the value people are creating and the money they're taking home.
And get a load of this number. By 2010, the average CEO at a big company was making 300 times what their typical employee made. 300! It shows pretty clearly that the rewards from all that increased productivity were not being shared very widely.
So here's the basic conflict in a nutshell. The policy assumption is, better skills from school lead to higher wages. But the economic reality is, productivity is way up, but wages are not. The policy assumption is, school reform can solve inequality. But the economic reality is, the gains have been flowing to the very, very top, no matter how much more educated the rest of us get.
And this all leads to a really provocative conclusion from this perspective. It's the idea that education reforms are essentially being used as a substitute for the tough economic reforms that are actually needed. We're busy trying to fix the schools, the symptom, while avoiding a much deeper conversation about the economic structure that might be the actual cause.
Which leaves us with this final, really important question to chew on. If improving schools all by themselves can't fix economic inequality, then what is the real goal of school reform? Anyon's work really pushes us to ask, are we just asking our schools and our teachers to solve problems that we, as a broader society, aren't willing to face? And that's the real power and the unsettling question at the heart of the hidden curriculum.